Can you give away any secrets of your theory of scaring people? The Psycho shower scene made many women afraid to take a shower in a house where they were alone for years, some to this day.
Well, I had a letter from a man who said that my daughter, after she saw the French film Diabolique, would never take a tub anymore because they had a scene with a man coming out of a tub and taking his eyes out, some horror scene.
Yeah.
He said, and after seeing that, she'd never take a tub. Now, having seen Psycho, she won't take a shower. Mm-hmm. As a result, she's very unpleasant to be around. So I replied, I said, dear sir, send her to the dry cleaners.
Lucky you!
Best 36 holes in golf.
You tuned in to Alternate Shots Podcast,
Arnie's Army.
where we talk about golf,
Marky's, Sandy's,
poker,
Bond, James Bond.
horse racing,
I'm all in.
great movies.
Alfred Hitchcock.
We have no script.
And down the stretch they come.
We're glad you joined us.
Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn.
Whoop, let's start again.
Ignorance. There's no authority in the world like it.
But there's got to be something more than that technically. I mean, how did you know that...
You know technically that the whole bag of movies can be learned in about a day and a half. I kid you not.
Mr. Hitchcock, why do you always make mystery films?
Well, life is a big mystery, isn't it? It always has been. I think people are intrigued by mystery to find out about things they don't know anything about. That's a mystery.
So, Billy, we're back, part 2 of, what'd you call it? Famous filmmakers, famous Hollywood directors. Cut.
Yeah. And we talked about two of the more epic type directors of all time, and the next two are two of the more rotund directors of all time, but very, very classic in their own ways.
By that you mean Orson Welles and Alfred Hitchcock. So let's get right to it. And here's Orson Welles talking about being a director and how difficult it was, quote unquote.
When you were out there, I've always wanted to know the answer to this. You always hear that when you were 26 years old and you made Citizen Kane, and they said, you can't do these things. You can't have the background in focus or whatever it was, or you can't shoot a scene that way, Mr. Wells, or young Mr. Wells, or Orson, or whatever they called you then. And you knew that you could. And how did you know this?
Because I didn't know any better, and it's very much in the line with what Jack was saying earlier in the show. It comes from just, sheer dumbness. You're sure it's got to be you're good and you're great. It's ignorance. There's no authority in the world like it.
But there's got to be something more than that technically. I mean, how did you know that...
You know technically that the whole bag of movies can be learned in about a day and a half. I kid you not.
Now, how does it work? How do you do it? You get a guy who knows how to...
And ask him, and that's the end of it. It isn't much harder than taking home movies. It's just about 3 points harder. Mm-hmm. And all these guys who do it try to make a big mystery of it because that's their living.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what do you think every director before, during, and after Orson Welles' interview is thinking about their occupation? They're coming home to, oh, it's so hard.
Well, that's Orson Welles, top to bottom. That's the way he was. He was, I don't want to say arrogant, but he's describing himself pretty well. He was just like, why not? Why can't I do this? I will do this. And it started with Orson Welles when he did the broadcast on the radio of the War of the Worlds, where he had half of America believing that the Earth was being invaded by Martians. He presented it on a Halloween night like it was a news butting into a radio show as a newscast. And he had all these, actors and making it very realistic. That's what got everybody's attention. That's why he got the right to make Citizen Kane in the first place. Leonard Maltin, the esteemed movie expert and critic, said about Citizen Kane that it broke all the rules and made some new ones. And it's so clear when you watch that movie, you see stuff that you see every day now, but you never had seen until then.
He talks about in this clip that I'll run again in a moment, how he even stepped foot on the stage of Citizen Cage at the age of 26. He tells a story where he watched John Ford's Stagecoach
Over and over again.
over 40 consecutive times over a month or so, and he had different people come in and watch it with him. He said, how did he do that? How do you do that? What's this? And he never took anything for granted as a director, that you did a lot of things as a director. You're a big fan of Greg Toland. Tell me why you are.
Toland was a cameraman, unfortunately died very young from some kind of heart disease. I think he was only in his 40s. But he was camera on Grapes of Wrath for John Ford. He was camera on Citizen Kane, many others. The Best Years of Our Lives, he was camera. His way of presenting a scene visually was just inspiring. If you have an eye for a camera, which I always did, I guess. I've always loved the camera work. And when I saw the way he did it, he was famous for deep focus, which means you're in focus and so is everything behind you way back. And there's a scene in The Best Years of Our Lives where Frederick March is in the foreground and Dana Andrews is in the back on the telephone. And they're both equally in focus and they're both equally important to the scene. And they're not with each other at the time. So, and Orson Welles, when he spoke to Greg Toland, he said, why do you want to do this? And Toland said, because you've never done this before.
Because I had in my first picture in Kane the greatest cameraman who ever lived, who was Greg Toland. And he came to my office and said, I want to work in your picture. My name is Toland. And I said, why do you, Mr. Toland? He said, because you've never made a picture. And you don't know what cannot be done.
Gee.
And so I said, but I really don't. Can you tell me? He says, there's nothing to it. And he gave me the day-and-a-half lessons. And he was right.
Showed you how the camera works.
That's right. There's nothing to do. And so we had the day-and-a-half, and there it was. But the only thing was, I'd been directing in the theater for years, and nowadays they have lighting people. We did then, and I had some of the greatest lighting people, in fact, in the theater, but many of the shows I lit myself, and I was supervised it, and I thought a director did that in a movie. So for the first 10 days, I was moving the lights around, you see. And Toland was behind me, fixing it up and changing the readings and saying, shut up, let him go on. I want to see what he's up to, which was very chic of him, I think. And then somebody told me, and then I went and got on my knees and apologized. And
he talks about ignorance. It's also naivety. He thought he had to do all these jobs because probably when he was younger, there were less and less people on the set. But to be able to work with these, these geniuses, they refer to Citizen Kane as the Mona Lisa of films.
Oftentimes called the best movie of all time. And to Orson's credit, some people don't think that he deserves credit for screenwriting and stuff like that, because Herman Mankiewicz basically wrote the screenplay. And that's great, and the screenplay is great, but that movie is so good because visually it's good, and because Orson Welles was such a good actor and almost overacting with his troupe of Mercury actors. It was their first movie. Joseph Cotton's first movie. Agnes Moorehead's first movie. Ray Collins' first movie. And these people all wanted to become big stars. And at the end of this whole thing, Orson Welles shared the director's credit with Craig Toland. Never seen that before anywhere, where the cinematographer is on the same page as the director at the end of a classic movie like Citizen Kane. It was the whole ball of wax.
That's the biggest gesture by any of these four filmmakers. You're going to see as we switch to Hitchcock, because we should switch to Hitchcock, how that might never have happened with Hitchcock. He had his own preferences and so forth, and but just the way Orson Welles tells the story.
And Orson Welles, unlike these other directors, acted in many of his own movies. So, Orson jumped in with both feet, and you gotta be respectful of that. He was fearless.
So, Billy, let's move over to one of our favorites, certainly in the top of my favorite directors, Alfred Hitchcock, and it's because he tells a story, not because of his personal life, but you have told earlier about the commonalities, and we're talking about Orson Welles, and Orson Welles and Alfred Hitchcock shared one fear. They both feared the police. As Orson
That's right.
Welles said, if the police came over, he had to have done it.
Yeah, he must have done it. Yeah.
He must have done it. Or as Hitchcock says, you know, he didn't drive a car because he was afraid of getting a parking ticket, a $2 parking ticket, and that could amount to murder, the way he tells the story.
Yeah.
Please. So let's see what he has to say.
Mr. Hitchcock, why do you always make mystery films?
Well, life is a big mystery, isn't it? It always has been. I think people are intrigued by mystery to find out about things they don't know anything about. That's a mystery.
But surely not as sensational as you make it seem.
Life is more
He
sensational.
directed this
I
shot.
would say that how does one describe drama? Drama is life with the dull bits cut out.
Nothing
This guy was the master, both on and off, behind the camera and otherwise. And as he said, when he was making a film, actually shooting the film was the anticlimactic part of the whole job.
he wanted
But
to understand the
he's the
story.
best, in my opinion. No one touches this guy for ability, for presenting a story, for suspense, for sure.
He had a 50-year film career, 53 films, as you've said before in other podcast episodes. He was a walking storyboard. So today you can buy software on your computer to storyboard your story, to figure out the things and the pieces and so forth. He loved figuring that out. What did he say? Gosh, there were 78 shots in the scene in
Psycho. Yeah.
You know, we'll talk about
78 pieces of film in 35 seconds or something like that.
yeah, and that took days
Boom,
to
boom, boom,
film.
boom, boom, boom.
Yeah,
Yeah, he said that the property guys had come up with this elaborate human-looking pink torso filled with blood, so wherever you stabbed it, blood would come out, but they never ended up using it. He didn't need it.
and what color was that filmed in that movie?
Black and white.
Yeah, so you're never going to see the red blood, but you knew it was red blood going down that drain. You knew that she
Yeah.
got hit, and you knew there was more stabbing to come.
And it led to what, in my lifetime, is one of the most memorable shots I've ever seen, where it starts on her eye and then zooms all the way out into the room, twisting and turning all the way out into the room, and ends up on the $40,000, the MacGuffin, which nobody cares about. But he knew he envisioned that scene. Who would envision a scene like that? Start right on her eyeball and end up in the motel room. Like, wow.
Well, here's his motivation.
The mystery, the form of mystery in a film as a kind of escape for yourself in any way, an escape possibly from your own fears.
Well, it might have started that way. I suppose it must have all started when I was in my mother's arms at the age of 6 months. And she said to me, "Boo," and scared the something out of me, you know.
Can you remember any specific instance when you were frightened as a child?
Well, I have a vague recollection of being scared by a policeman. I think that when I was probably about 4 or 5 years of age, being sent with a note to the local police station and being shut in a cell as a punishment for some mishap or I don't even know what it was for. I was probably unjustly incarcerated at the time. But you
As a 6-year-old, he tells that story in so many places, whether it was 4 or 5 or 6. But the recollection is the fright that he got from the police officer.
And never got over. And he says a psychologist will tell you once you figure out what it is, you're over it. He said, nah, that didn't work for me.
He didn't get over it. And at the American Film Institute, where they bestowed a lifetime achievement on him, and they did it very cleverly, every living actor, actress that was in his movies was at that place. And then people who weren't, like I think I saw Barbara Streisand there. I think I saw some popular cultural people there that weren't in any of his films, but everybody, they must have been running over to go to that. And he was there and he was talking about that story. And that was near the end of his life because they really had to prop him up to get him there. And Alma, his wife, was there too. She had just had a stroke. She was crying when he attributed his lifelong success to 4 people. And each one of those people turns out to be his wife, Alma.
Yeah.
But you mentioned Psycho, so let's go to Psycho here.
Well, Psycho's the movie that put him in the public eye. It was no longer just, film goers and, film aficionados and people who appreciate film. Psycho was like Jaws, basically. It brought in everybody. They all want to see this horror movie, this very scary movie. It put his name in the mouths of people who had never heard of him before.
Yeah, he called it a shocker, but suspense and shock were in there, and dread, those 3 things. And he preferred that line of work over anything else.
New film is called Psycho. Can you tell me something about it?
Well, Psycho is my first attempt at a shocker. In other words, it has in its content certain episodes which do shock. In some sense it could be called a horror film, but the horror only comes to you after you've seen it, when you get home in the dark.
And when you get home in the dark and you're putting the pieces together and you don't sleep that night.
This is where he tells the story about the woman who wouldn't take a tub after seeing Diabolique, an old movie where there was a gory scene in a bathtub, and then she sees Psycho, and so she won't take a bath, and now she won't take a shower. She's become very unpleasant to be around, and she won't take a shower. She won't take a tub. And he wrote back, send her to the dry cleaner.
Well, let's hear the rest of this here. This is just great. And again, he's my favorite because the way he tells stories, and that is the same way he tells stories in movies.
The range of stories he told is unbelievable.
Yeah, he just liked to find the murder and walk backwards from that. In Strangers on a Train, about midway through, there's a murder, and
I think he said at one point, I'm always working on a film.
Yeah,
what
was it in the movie where it's all in the apartment? Rope. We've talked about Rope. Rope is all done basically inside that apartment, kind of like his concept with Rear Window. Not all in the apartment.
And Dial M for Murder.
And Dial M for Murder. But 90% of those, the scene is there.
I think the opening scene of Rope is outside the apartment, like on the balcony.
Just walking
and the rest,
around. Yeah.
And the rest is in there. And I think Dial M for Murder, there might be an occasional shot of the exterior, like Ray Milland standing outside the apartment building. But again, the rest of it takes place in there. There's a shot of him and Robert Cummings at the phone where he actually dialed the M for murder. But again, mostly takes place in that parlor, as many great movies do.
The interviewer here goes, and this movie isn't out yet, so he has to describe a little bit further about Psycho.
About a particular kind.
Oh, well, the broad idea is a young man played by Anthony Perkins who runs a small motel, about a 12-unit, a rather cheesy affair, really. And in an old house behind the motel is his mother, and she, I'm afraid, is homicidal. He should put her away, but he loves her too much. So you can imagine what happens to the guests at the motel.
Well, we know what happens to the guests in the motel.
And the people investigating the guests at the motel.
Well, and the way he describes that, you think there's 2 characters here when there's a split personality character, but he doesn't lead into that. But in his mind, there were 2 characters. The way he thought about it and directed it, there was the mother and there was the son.
And even at the end where the psychiatrist, I think his name is Simon Oakland, might be the guy who played him, talking about the 2 characters.
Exactly.
As if they're 2 different people. But Norman's mother, and again, we should mention the MacGuffin. That was Hitchcock's term for in spy movies, or in this case in Psycho. The MacGuffin is the thing that everybody in the movie is after, but the audience doesn't really care what it is. It could be microfilm, it could be jewels. It doesn't matter what it was to the audience. And he calls that the MacGuffin.
So, Billy, we're talking about two classic filmmakers in Orson Welles and Alfred Hitchcock. Alfred Hitchcock did twice as many films as Welles, but they both told the story so well. And it was the director that was the most important thing. Matter of fact, Hitchcock referred to actors as you need to treat them like cattle. They were just part of the whole thing, like the lighting director and the property man and so forth. He had a real feeling about this, but he was so technically correct in that he would tie the birds to Tippi Hedren's arms and film these. He said the hardest part was training the birds. The first time I ever heard those birds were trained in the birds, but that's the detail that he went at. Final thoughts.
Well, Psycho led him to the birds, but all the movies he made up till then, Foreign Correspondent, The Lady Vanishes, Dial M for Murder, were very different. But that shows you how versatile Alfred Hitchcock was and what a mind he had. And as he always said, you know, once it's all planned out with the writers and everything like that, shooting the film was so anticlimactic to him because he already saw it.
You were great about telling me to watch certain movies, but let's instruct our audience 2 or 3 that you would recommend they go and invest some time with. Definitely the ones that they may not know about. Which ones would you recommend?
Foreign Correspondent, North by Northwest, Rope. I think The Lady Vanishes is also excellent.
Notorious
is also excellent.
The best one. It's all black and white. Claude Rains. The acting in that is unbelievable.
And The 39 Steps, another old one, black and white, with the same kind of theme where an innocent guy gets tossed into a situation that, you know, gets worse and worse, and he's got to find his way out.
This is fabulous, Billy. There's no shortage of stories for John Ford, Howard Hawks, Orson Welles, or Alfred Hitchcock. We hope you've enjoyed this. Give us some comments. And if you have other directors that you want us to talk about, I love Frank Capra. We'll do it, but we need some feedback.
Yeah. And someday we'll get to Guy Ritchie, one of the modern day great directors. And I think he's right up there with the best that ever walked Hollywood.
All right, you're the director. What do we do at the end of it?
Cut. That's a wrap.
Well, I once gave a dinner party for my wife. Do you know Chasen's restaurant out in Hollywood? He had a back garden in those days. We had a table for 14 people. And I got Central Casting to give me an aristocratic old lady. We had her hair done beautifully, dressed her well, and sat her at the head of the table. And the guests arrived and said, "Who's the old lady?" I said, "I don't know."
Oh.
I said, "I've never met her before," which was the truth. I had. And the proprietor of the restaurant kept out of the way, and guests continued to arrive, and always the same question: "Who's the old lady?" I said, "I don't know, we're trying to find out." So finally the proprietor came, and I said, "Dave, go and find out who that old lady is." Sitting up, and he went and bent over her. He came back and she said, "She's with Mr. Hitchcock's party." I said, "I've never seen her before in my life." Well, she sat there the whole meal. Drinking martinis, by the way.
Oh, yeah. Did she enjoy it?
Apparently, she had to be helped to the car.
Why are you laughing?
Well, at least we have the laugh to add at the end.
Right. We've gone from 12 handicaps at this to 19 handicaps in just a week.
That's what happens. Somebody changed my grip, and the next thing you know, I can't do the podcast anymore. I felt like I was in the first row of the first pew at church right during the sermon.
And your brother was poking you.
My brother was making me laugh.
Thanks for joining us today.
Billy Harmon.
We really appreciate your
Double
feedback.
Indemnity.
And please
Arky.
subscribe to the show.
Two-router.
Hit 'em
Odd
hard
Job.
and hit 'em off.
That's 36 holes.